I'll be honest, I'm a sucker for pretty much any story which incorporates flashbacks of some type. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the timeline traversal of a story which helps make it feel more engaging. Or maybe it's just a satisfaction of curiosity, which was the case for arguably the first TV series I saw which used flashbacks, Lost. Either way, if there's a flashback in something, there's a good chance I'll enjoy it. So when I first heard that one of Second Sight's main selling points was a dual timeline story, I knew I wanted to check it out. Flashbacks, time skips, whatever you want to call them, are not uncommon in a lot of story-driven games nowadays, with blockbuster franchises like Call of Duty using them extensively. However, when Second Sight released in 2004, this was a relatively new storytelling mechanic. Funnily enough, the developer for Second Sight, Free Radical, were also responsible for the Time Splitters franchise, which also included multiple jumps in time, and despite the comparisons to some of Rare's work on the N64, is a unique and thoroughly enjoyable first-person shooting franchise. Now, Second Sight was first released in 2004, but upon initial release, it only came to GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox, with the PC port arriving a little later in 2005. Today we are playing this PC port, the GOG version to be exact. The reason we're playing the GOG version is because at the time of producing this video, the GOG version is the only version available which supports native widescreen and high resolutions without any third-party patches, making it both more enjoyable to play and easier to capture. When the game initially released, it's probably fair to say it released to a largely average reception. However, 2004 had a lot of new and existing AAA franchise releases. Half-Life 2, Halo 2, Far Cry. I could go on, but I think you get the idea. In a sea of average games, there was no shortage of excellent games. And while I can't find definitive sales figures for Second Sight, I do suspect that these AAA releases impacted its overall reception and sales. As far as my personal opinion goes, I'm probably with the majority of critics of the time here. It's certainly not a bad game, and I can see the ambition that the developers had for this game, but for whatever reason, this ambition doesn't always translate into good gameplay, and mechanics which felt dated in 2004 have not aged well in modern times. There are times when I disagree with the critics, but this time, I feel like they got it pretty right. One of the strengths of the game is the story. Now, I will say, like some action movies of the same period, it does tell a story which at times requires substantial suspension of belief. But while the plot does have more holes than Swiss cheese, like Swiss cheese, it is still enjoyable. The story follows the journey of John Vaddick, who after waking up in an isolation cell of a hospital-like facility, finds himself suffering from amnesia and possessing powerful psychic abilities. After escaping from the facility, Vaddick experiences a flashback revealing he was a scientist recruited by the Pentagon to join a special task force called Winter Ice, with their mission being to visit Siberia to recover a Russian scientist. The story then starts to follow both a past and present timeline, with the player slowly piecing together Vaddick's memories while providing new mysteries for the player to uncover. There's a good mix of twists and turns in the story, complete with a fairly satisfying conclusion, all wrapped up in a 10 to 12 hour adventure which feels just about right for the story it's telling. Before we continue, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this content, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's find some cover, focus on our abilities, and head back to 2005 to remember Second Sight. It's hard to take an objective look at Second Sight without seeing its many influences. Splinter Cell, Metal Gear Solid, Max Payne, honestly there's too many to list. At the core, the game markets itself as both a stealth and action game. There are levels which require extensive combat, and levels which invite, although to be fair not require, stealth. For me, this split persona is at the core of the game's biggest issue, which is consistency. Splinter Cell was great because it was a stealth game. Its camera, controls, in-game mechanics were all optimized for stealth. The same goes for Max Payne. It was an action game with systems and mechanics optimized for shooting. Splinter Cell wouldn't make a good shooter, and Max Payne probably wouldn't make a very good stealth game. The challenge with Second Sight is it tries to be both of these things at the same time, with core systems which are arguably not optimized for either. Firstly, there's the basics like camera and control. Now, while the camera control is over the shoulder by default, it does allow you to switch to a more cinematic third-person view, kind of like Resident Evil. The challenge with this mode is that it's pointless in combat as you can't see any distant enemies, and in stealth, you can't always see things like security cameras or guards in the distance. I honestly don't really understand its inclusion. However, the good news is that for general traversal, the third-person over-the-shoulder view holds up most of the time. Combat is a different story, but I'll get to that shortly. Control largely depends on the environment you are in. In large open spaces, control is fine. However, in tighter areas that require precision, it can be challenging, mainly because the speed that the player moves is somewhere between a walk and a jog, resulting in a somewhat twitchy feel. To be fair, this isn't really a big issue in isolation, and I could probably count on one hand the times that control alone caused an issue, but when this issue is combined with the combat challenges, which I promise I'm about to get to, it becomes a far larger issue. So combat, what can I say? There are times when it works well and times when it doesn't work well at all. What's ironic about it is the way in which it's presented in the tutorial makes it seem quite intuitive. In fact, when I first completed the tutorial, I made a note saying unique combat. And, well, I wasn't wrong. It is unique, but not in the way I originally thought. When you switch to any ranged weapon, the screen highlights possible targets with a kind of soft lock-on to these targets, allowing you to make small adjustments in aim for things like headshots. Now, in the tutorial, which presents targets which gradually move towards you in a perfectly straight line, this works great. The issue is that outside of this tutorial, this scenario is never repeated, as the enemies, which to their credit have decent AI, will often swarm you. And outside of the fact that it's difficult to move this soft lock-on to moving targets, the game also highlights inanimate objects like boxes, which further crowds the heads-up display and can lead to difficulty in acquiring your target. Now, there is an exception to this, which is the sniper rifle, which offers a miniature lens on screen to help with target acquisition. This lens, combined with the soft lock-on ability and very strong stopping power, means that there is very rarely a time in the game where the sniper rifle is not the best weapon to use. Even in tight conditions, because of the issues with targeting on other weapons, the sniper rifle is often the best weapon to use, which feels a little unusual to say the least. However, it is a satisfying weapon to use, and despite me feeling that it's overpowered, I never did tire of using it. Of course, weapons aren't the only offensive capability in Second Sight, with a collection of psychic abilities also aiding the player in their journey. There's a lot of abilities in here, with everything from being able to throw people around the room, turn invisible, and even heal yourself on demand. Some of these are well integrated into the gameplay loop, while others feel unbalanced or just not overly useful. The ability to throw people around, for example, while novel, is only really useful as a novelty. The ability to turn invisible, which is questionably overpowered, allows you to bypass entire segments of levels. It's not all questionable though. Abilities like possession, enabling you to possess your enemies to do your bidding, is creative and well realized. Oh, and there are some puzzles which require the use of these abilities to progress, but at times they feel more like artificial gatekeeping as opposed to being well integrated into the level design. It feels like the levels were originally designed before these abilities were implemented, as opposed to the levels which were designed with them in mind. The actual levels themselves, though, are very good and have a lot of little details added to further sell the environment to the player, with a lot of levels including computers you can access, assuming you have the login details, to do things like read emails, open doors, and even view maps. There's even a fully functional arcade game that you can find in one of the levels and play through, which, while being a novelty, is a really nice touch. Now, when I play games which offer stealth as an option, I generally try to lean into this option as much as possible. But in the case of Second Sight, I had a lot of challenges in trying to do this successfully, to the point that about halfway in, I just decided to go full on Rambo, and in my opinion, even though the game has some combat challenges, the Rambo approach was a lot more fun. There is thought put into the stealth elements, like the ability to hide in closets and whatnot, but the issue for me is that it just wasn't fun, and I never felt encouraged to take the stealth option, which in part is compounded by the ability to effectively regenerate your health to 100% on demand. Regardless of which path you choose to take gameplay-wise, pacing is very good, with the player slowly becoming more powerful and unlocking the many mysteries of the game at a satisfying rate. There's a fairly lengthy escort mission in the game which I feel went on a little too long, but that's more of an exception to the otherwise excellent overall pacing. Like the level design, presentation is of an equally high standard. In the early 2000s, some games opted for more realism-focused art direction, while others, like Second Sight, focused on a more stylized art direction. It's no surprise that those that went for the more stylized art direction have stood the test of time far better than those that focused on fidelity, and this is really evident here, with the over 20-year-old game still standing up as visually appealing in modern times. There's also the implementation of ragdoll physics, which upon release was a fairly progressive thing for the time and certainly added to its overall launch appeal. Performance and stability are great, with only a handful of very minor clipping issues appearing throughout my entire playthrough, with nothing impacting the actual gameplay in any way. There is a question to be asked of the actual PC port presentation when compared to the consoles, and look, I might have a different opinion to the masses here, but I feel like more could have been done to optimize this for PC, especially given it didn't join the console versions for a day one release in 2004. Some of my issues here are around things like menus, which are not optimized for keyboard and mouse. For example, some things can be selected with the keyboard, but other things, like the difficulty, must be selected with the mouse only. But this isn't my chief concern here. It's more around the combat, in particular the aiming system. The aiming system in the game is clearly optimized for the lack of precision found in controllers of the time. However, with the PC targeting a keyboard and mouse, there was an opportunity to change this to something closer to that of Max Payne, and honestly, I think this would have been a really good change. And what's even more interesting is that the PC version doesn't even list controller support as an option. Alas, this was a time where developers were prioritizing console releases, so while I'm disappointed, I'm not entirely surprised. Sound design is solid, with the game featuring an extensive set of dialogue from characters in both gameplay and cutscenes. All of the voice actors seem to suit their in-game role really well, and definitely remind me of a 90s action movie, which is always a good thing. Let's take a quick listen.
Come in, Vatic. Wild. Respond if you can hear me.
Colonel, yes, we're here.
Thank God you're alive. Listen, this isn't a secure channel. We've got to be quick. Where are you?
Inside the pipeline station. It looks like the main control room.
Okay, stay put. We're coming to get you. Any sign of Grienko?
He isn't here, but we know where to find him.
Damn fine work, Vatic.
Attention, squad, attention! They're in control room! Kill them!
Damn it, Vatic. You need to get out of there. I'll send someone in to help you out.
On our way, Colonel. We'll head for the ground floor.
Effects and soundtrack are also good, with all of the weapons sounding appropriately punchy, and the soundtrack, while fairly low-key, suiting the overall mood of the gameplay perfectly. Second Sight is a game that is constantly pushing and pulling against its own in-game mechanics. There are times where this manifests itself as giving the player agency, and there are times where this manifests itself as giving the player frustration. It is very obvious by spending any amount of time with the game that a lot of effort went into its production. I just think that this effort could have been refined into either a stealth or combat-focused game, as opposed to trying to find something in between. There are so many good things about Second Sight, but when you have issues with the basics, like camera and control, it makes it hard to enjoy those good things. However, if you can look past some of its issues, there is a good game here, and something that no doubt helped shape the future of third-person action games today. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.